Hi, I'm going to talk to you about voices and the brain. And although we don't normally think of it this way, the human voice, in addition to being an amazing way of transmitting language and information, is also comfortably one of the most complex sounds in nature. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about why that is and how we manage to make such sounds and what kind of information they carry. A first point that you need to think about when you're thinking about the human voice and how it's evolved is somewhere that seems a bit abstract, but actually is incredibly important for how we talk. So at some point in our evolution, we started to walk upright, and this marks us out as being very different from other primates and other land mammals. And that's because other primates and other land mammals, when they're moving around, they need to use their forelimbs as well as their hind limbs to support their weight. Now, not walking on our forelimbs means that very obviously our hands have become very different, and our hands have gone from being effectively feet into these extraordinary ways of kind of interacting with and manipulating the world. Quite amazing. But walking upright has affected another part of our body very profoundly, and that's actually our rib cage. So the human rib cage is sort of enclosing the thoracic cavity, so your lungs are in there, your heart's in there, and of course they're very important for breathing. So when you breathe in and out, you're using your rib cage to pull air in and out of the lungs. If I was to pop a little breath belt on you, I would see this movement of the air going in and out of the lungs as your rib cage is moving in and out, and you get this lovely sinusoidal movement of the rib cage moving in and out, moving the air around. Very important. Don't stop doing it. But other mammals, other quadrupeds, they need to also, in addition to breathing with their rib cage, they also use their rib cage to support their weight. So they're moving around and standing on their forelimbs as well as their hind limbs, and that means they need to engage their rib cage to help them remain upright. We don't have to do that. And what's happened in evolution is that we've developed a completely different pattern of neural control over the muscles between our ribs, called the intercostal muscles, that mean we still use them for breathing. Very important. Don't stop doing that. But also we have a completely different use of the muscles between the ribs, and we can use those to speak. So when we take a breath in, if I now show you that same ribcage pattern, what you see is we take a breath in to speak. We take a breath in, and then we very, very finely control the movement of those same muscles that we'd normally use to push air in and out. And what we're actually doing with that is something totally different from breathing. We are using that to actually control the flow of air through the voice box or the larynx. If I keep talking without taking another breath, you can hear how much work they have to do. Now, you're probably thinking that was very interesting, Sophie. Obviously very interesting, but slightly strange. Why did you do that? Well, actually, we're the only animal that can do that. We can control our breath in this incredibly fine way, and that lets us talk and sing and beatbox and all the other things that humans can do with their voices, because we can take a breath in, and then instead of just making a noise on the breath out like other animals do, we are able to produce this long flow of air that lets us make a noise at the voice box, and that gives us pitch in our voice and rhythm in our voice, and it lets us talk in sentences. In fact, if you look at somebody talking, you can tell for how long they're going to speak by how much breath they take in at the start, because this is actually, it's almost like the unit in which we're planning talking. So our voices start down at our rib cage, and then they're shaped by other very important characteristics of how our bodies have evolved. So if you compare, this is it's got a sagittal view, like you're looking from the side from a human, and this is a chimpanzee. There are some other things you can immediately notice. First of all, the human face is very flat compared to the chimpanzee, and in fact other mammals have got even longer faces, and that has some really important effects on our tongues. So our tongues don't need to be long to reach the front of our mouths. Our tongues are short and nimble compared to the tongues of other mammals. If you feel the roof of your mouth, you often feel, most people feel it feels very domed. There's a sort of like an arch at the top. That's not the case, the roof of the mouth, for any other mammal. So we not only have this short, fat, nimble tongue, but we've also got more space above it for the tongue to be able to move up into. And as we'll see, that's very important for how we make sounds. So what we're seeing is the sort of the human face is influencing a lot of the shape of the articulators that we can use to make sound. If we go back to that voice box, so in all other mammals, the voice box, that the larynx is sitting up at the top of the windpipe, anchoring the back of the tongue. And that's actually because the job of the larynx is to stop things from falling into the lungs and stopping you from being able to breathe. In humans, the larynx is permanently descended. So our larynx is sitting right much further down, much lower than the tongue. It frees up the tongue. It means our tongues are able to make much more complex movement. It also means that we've got a longer pipe with which to make the sounds of speech. So we're actually seeing here a multiple functions of this descended larynx. And of course, our larynx is also very mobile. If you put your finger on your throat and go, you can actually feel your voice box moving up and down. When you change your pitch, that's the larynx moving around. If we actually look at the larynx in detail, it's slightly terrifying. This is a larynx in action, and this is made by somebody dropping a camera down the back of someone's nose. So it's sitting back here at the top of the voice box.
Hello! I haven't had visitors in so long.
What are you?
I'm a voice box. Some people call me a larynx. See my two vocal cords moving apart and together as I talk? They come apart so that the air can get through them, and they come together to vibrate and make sound as I exhale. Let me show you.
So everybody's reaction generally on seeing this, the larynx really in action, is to go, my goodness me, that's terrifying. And we just have to move past that. We've all got one. It looks kind of crazy. Now, this is the larynx actually is situated with the tongue and all the other articulators and actually helping us make a sound. So here we've got two different people talking in the scanner, and we can see their vocal tracts. That's a female, that's a male. And what you can see down here, we've got the larynx on the left, there on the right, and that's moving up and down as the person's talking and singing and doing the other things that people are doing here. But look how much the tongue is deforming and changing. And what that's doing is we make a sound at the larynx, and then we shape that sound with everything else happening up here at the articulator. So how our tongue is moving, how our lips and our jaw and our soft palate are moving. And that's giving you a glimpse of the complexity of the sounds that we make when we talk, because it's being underpinned by this extraordinary complexity that's happening in our vocal tracts, of course, most of which we can't see at all. Now, if you look at the sound consequences of this, the human voice, there's a huge amount of information contained in here. First of all, if the person is speaking a language that you speak, you will be able to understand what they're saying from this. So we get language information from the human voice. We also get a lot of age information from the human voice. As we get older, when we're born and we grow, our voices change as we physically get larger. Bigger objects make louder, lower sounds than smaller objects. And as we move through different stages of our life, our voices change. So boys go through a secondary descent to the larynx when they are in their teen years, which means that the adult male larynx is lower than the adult female larynx. But that continues. So around menopause, women often change, their voice changes a bit such that it gets a little bit lower in pitch, becomes a little bit more masculinized. So Victoria Wood found that as she got older, singing her song, Let's Do It, got harder and harder to sing because it keeps changing pitch and going up and up and up, and that got harder for her to do. Something else that you can get information in very much from the voice is somebody's sex or somebody's gender. So differences between male and female adult voices in humans are actually bigger than the differences between physical height in male and female adult humans. There's a very big difference between an adult male and an adult female voice. Male voices are lower in pitch, they have a wider spectral range, they have a wider range for pitch. So males can make very low but also very high sounds. And that seems to be important in terms of how we recognize voices. And of course, your gender is also strongly influencing what you sound like, or your gender identity. Your health, things that affect your body will affect your voice, because we make our voices with our body. So obviously, if somebody has a cold, all these areas that you can see are very inflamed and people's voices change as a result. The people who've got a broken bone or people who are in pain will carry themselves differently. And that will mean that they sound different because their voice is being affected by how they are holding themselves. So actually it can be quite subtle effects of health on the voice. Again, things that affect your body will affect your voice, and your mood, your emotional state will have big influences on your body, and that will affect your voice. If somebody is very, very frightened, what you'll see is they often have an enormous release of adrenaline, and this is the fight or flight neurotransmitter, and this makes you ready for action or to run away, and it affects how your muscles work. And that affects how your voice works, and people's voices often go very high in pitch and quite wobbly when they're frightened, entirely due to the results of adrenaline. Your geographical origins and your socioeconomic status are also influencing how you sound as an adult. And that's because humans are vocal learners. We, like songbirds, learn the languages and the words, that sounds that we can make from the adults and the other people around us when we're growing up. So depending on where we are in the country and the different social groups that we're with, that will influence how you sound. And it's also a very rich source for bias against people, depending on what they sound like, because we're not always rational when we make decisions about people based on what they sound like. Your affiliations and your affections will also be strongly shown in your voice. You will change your voice a lot depending on who you're talking to, particularly if you like them. The more you like somebody, the more you tend to shift your voice to resemble theirs. When I've been on the phone to my mum, my partner can tell that I've been talking to my mum because I talk like my mum for about half an hour afterwards. Love my mum, don't really want to sound like her, but I can't avoid this sort of absolutely obligatory shifting of my voice to be like hers, to share a relationship with her that way. And of course, all of this is also really bound up in expressing our identity. So if you know somebody from, you know somebody's familiar to you, you are very likely to be quite good at spotting their voice. We tend to think of faces as being very good ways of conveying identity, and of course they are, but voices are also a very powerful way of expressing who we are. And that's interesting if we start to look at the brain systems which underpin this. So we've known for a very long time the brain areas that are important to do with speaking aloud, and they're found in these regions, all shown here in pink. So you get auditory parts of the brain, because when you're talking, you hear your voice. You get primary motor parts of the brain, so brain areas that are directly controlling what the articulators are doing. You also get sensory parts of the brain. If you've ever had a dental anesthetic and half your mouth is numb, you probably noticed it was very difficult to talk, because suddenly you can't get all this information about the feeling in your face to actually help you guide making these articulations. And then there are other brain areas like the supplementary motor cortex and so-called Broca's area down here, which are really, really important for planning and implementing the control of speech. Now, if there's damage to these networks, people often have problems in speaking aloud. However, it's also becoming very clear that these networks are not only governing what you say, they are also really important in how you say things. So, for example, this exact same network seems to be very important in how you express your identity in your voice. When you speak aloud, you are not just saying the words that you want to say, you are also being you. You are putting you into your voice in how you speak. And that's really a very interesting part of voices. When we think about voices, we're always thinking about like a bit of a performance. It's always a bit of a show. Voices are social things. We talk when we're around other people, and they are a way of us controlling our social image. And we do control our social image by how we talk. As I say, we change our voice a lot depending on who we talk to. And these social effects can be really interesting on the voice. So, for example, boys will talk with lower pitched voices than girls, even though there are no anatomical differences between the boys and the girls. When they be pre-puberty, the voice is just determined by the physical size of the body. But the boys are reflecting the deeper voices of the adult men that they've heard around them. So there's a really strong social influence on how they speak. Women in the West speak with lower pitches than women in the West 60, 70 years ago. If you go back and watch an old film like Brief Encounter, you'll notice that the women are speaking with really quite high-pitched voices. And what seems to have happened is that where women have started over the past few decades to move into professions that were traditionally associated just with men, they have lowered the pitch of their voices. And that seems to be there's lots of things about us we can't change. We can change the pitch of our voices. If you go to parts of the world where male and female people occupy very different parts of the workplace, for example, what you find is that male and female voices not only are quite different in pitch, exaggeratedly so, they are actually enhanced when there are men and women in the same space. So when there are men around, women will raise the pitch of their voices, and the men will drop the pitch of their voices when there's women around. We will change our voice a lot depending on who we're talking to. So I'm speaking to you very differently now because I'm trying to be a proper professor speaking at this wonderful Ada Lovelace Day event. And I will sound quite different, I promise you, if I'd gone back to my hometown of Blackburn and I was meeting some old friends in the pub, because I would be showing a different kind of face to the world, and my voice would unavoidably start to change with aspects of that. Voices reflect as much how we want people to hear us as they are anything innate about what any one person's voice should sound like just by looking at their body. And they're always a mix of voluntary and involuntary processes. So a lot of those things to do with, say, age and health and mood, they can influence our voice in a way we don't even necessarily realize is happening. And that's what means that both voices are always a performance, but they've also got this bit of biology going on all the time, because the state of your body will also influence what you sound like. Right at the start of the talk, I said that the human voice is the most complex sound in nature. Now, I always used to say that human speech was the most complex sound in nature because it is unbelievably complex. But then I had the opportunity to work with a beatboxer. This is Harry Yeff, and we popped him into the scanner and had a look at his vocal tract. And I just want to show you how much more he is doing when he does beatboxing than we do when we're speaking. We're almost doing the bare minimum when we start talking. You can hear how many different sounds he's making. And look at the shapes his tongue's making. So one of the things I'm interested in voices is how much we can learn about really why voices evolved in the first place from looking at vocal skills like that, as much as anything we can learn from language. Thank you very much for your time.